This tutorial is for drawing and shading a feather, but you may also want to look at it if you have an object that has a frayed edge or a couple different values inside of a given area or shape like you see in the brown area of the feather. I started off drawing the contour looking just at the edges, and when I look at the frayed part on the left of the feather, don't worry about all those details now. You just want to kind of group them into big basic shapes. In this slide, I added the darker shapes, the black areas, into my contour drawing. And as you do this, look really closely because they're not straight lines, they're bumpy and a little bit curved, and they're all a little bit different. When I start to add value, I started on the left side, looking at my light areas first, putting in kind of an even basic value all over, not worrying about my frayed part yet again, just kind of getting a basic value down. Started to add some of the darks, building up slowly, and in this you can kind of start to see a little bit of the lines that define the frayed part of the feather showing up. After you have some of your medium values, you can start to build up to your darker areas. I've started to add some of those black shapes. Stick to one area at a time and then move on. More of the black shapes are added in here, and you can also see that even in those brown sort of medium gray values, I've started to add a little bit of that irregular darker areas on top. Once you have a base value for your feather, you can start to add some of the details in, and I did this with a stick eraser so I could get some really sharp, defined highlights. And as I did this, I started to get a little bit of the frayed texture on the left side. This is where you can see my eraser marks. It's just a little bit of highlights going through, and you can see how they kind of trail through both the medium gray and the dark areas, and it started to create a little bit of that frayed area on the far left. Then I went through with a really sharp pencil and laid down some darker areas right next to those highlights to create some contrast, allow those highlights to be seen a little bit more, and also continue to make a frayed edge along that left side with those pencil marks. I darkened some areas on the left side of my feather after I did that, and then moved on to the central feather, laying down a light value that's going to eventually be the very lightest area that you see on either side of the black shapes. Inside of the brown area, I added some more value, building it up, so now you can kind of see a difference between the very lightest area and the medium brown area. Then you can start to add in some of the details that you see inside of the big brown areas of the feather. And when you do this, or any area that looks kind of like this on another object, you really want to look at the different shapes that are in there. Some are like lines, some are small dots, some are organic blobs. The key is it's not a pattern, it's irregular. Make sure that these details are different shapes and sizes, and really look closely at your object as you're adding them in. Then I went through and started again like I did before to use my stick eraser and pull in some of those highlights throughout the feathers. This is a building process. It's going to look kind of funny and blobby at first, but as you continue to add your lights and darks and build it up, it will look like a feather in the end. Again, after I made some highlights with the stick eraser, I took a really sharp pencil and added some darker lines right next to it to create contrast and help you see kind of those different grooves within the feather. In this slide, I made those grooves a little bit darker, which actually I'm not sure was a great idea. I kind of liked it a little bit before where it was light and faint. That looked a little bit more like the softness of a feather. But I also started to add the darker areas of the black shapes. As you add these dark areas, make sure again that they're not straight across. They're going to be kind of bumpy and uneven. Really look at the shape that they are. They're not rectangles. They're uneven, and even the edge of it is kind of frayed. I continued adding in my black shapes, um, being really careful when you add your dark values that you're creating sort of flat areas here and that your pencil lines are not showing and that you're not damaging the paper. I also used my stick eraser again, pulled out some of the light areas that are above and below those black shapes to create more contrast, and I started to add some of the value of the third feather that is behind the central feather. Anytime you have one object behind another, the object in front is going to cast a shadow on the object in the back. In the last slide, I kind of worked on my contrast, making my dark areas a little bit darker, pulling out some of my highlights again with that stick eraser. Also looking inside of that brown area, adding some of those irregular shapes and making them a little bit darker. Some are circles, some are lines, some are blobs, as well as the feather on the left side as it went behind that central feather, again creating a little bit of a shadow and kind of enhancing that as well. There may be some areas on that left side that I could still make a little bit darker and maybe work a little bit more on that frayed part. But you can see from what I have started that this is a building up of the feather. At first it's going to look kind of funny and choppy, but as you layer up, putting in more values, erasing, putting in details, you're going to end up with a nice looking feather at the end. Hope this helps.